How's it going, my friends? Thanks for joining us on another one of these videos on the PSM Mini Masterclass. Today we're talking all about process hazard analysis, or PHA for short. You might be wondering, what is a PHA? And some of you may have even been in them, or sat through them, or facilitated them. And if you have, you might be wondering, is it possible to do a PHA without being just totally bored? I get it. I think, like PHAs are very detailed analysis. And so if you don't know what they are, a PHA, or process hazard analysis, is a very systematic look at the process and all the things that could go wrong and all the safety interlocks that prevent the things from going wrong, or if they go wrong, protect the people or the assets involved. So again, that's very high level, and the specific way that you apply that to your facility, it kind of depends on the complexity of it, the size, what kind of chemistry is involved, what kind of hazards are there. And again, we take a deeper dive into the different methodologies in our full master class, but just high level, some like the PSM program mentions things like a what if analysis or a checklist analysis, which those are a little bit on the more basic side of a process hazard analysis. It's more of like a simple change that's being made, and you can go through like a simple checklist. And it goes to things that are a little bit more detailed and complicated, like a hazard and operability review, which is a HAZOP. And again, we'll dive into how the mechanics of a HAZOP work in our full master class. But whoa, like, when do we do PHAs and why are we talking about this? So if you're gonna build a new facility, and before you run it, you've got to make sure that all the hazards have been adequately addressed. Okay, so when you construct a facility, it goes from like someone's idea, right, on a napkin, like, I want to build this gas plant or refinery or chemical plant, right? And we're going to take this feedstock and we're going to turn it into something valuable, right? And we're going to make a business out of this. Okay, so we're going to build it, and this is all like on a napkin, right? It goes from some guy's idea or a group of people collaborating, and then they go through what's called the front-end engineering design, where they say, well, what is it going to take to get this to go? And they kind of test it out, and it's like, hey, well, that looks pretty good on paper. Let's go through some detailed design, and then it goes through some other project checkpoints, right? Once everyone's happy about the detail, they get construction involved, they start building it, and that somewhere, through this process, before it's totally built and done, and you click run and go, there's going to be a spot in here where you do a process hazard analysis, and preferably before you finish building the thing, because you can imagine if we take a deep dive on your proposed safety systems and interlocks, you're going to find deficiencies in there, and you might actually have to drastically change some of your process as a result of the process hazard analysis. And so you don't want to wait till after the thing's totally built to do it. It's probably somewhere in the engineering phase, when you kind of have a concept, but you haven't bought anything, right? You haven't actually built much, right? It's still on paper where it's easy to change stuff. And so what you're going to do is, you've done this engineering and you look at all the inputs. It's a very detailed and systematic approach. You're going to look at every piece of pipe and every vessel and every element and every unit operation, and change in controls and change in pressures and flow rates and all that. And you're going to imagine, what would happen if this failed, or what would happen if that failed, or we had more flow than we're expecting, or we had less flow than expecting. And it's a very systematic way where you follow some guide words, and it helps flush out anything that you might have overlooked in the initial engineering and design phase. And to have an effective PHA, you surely need an engineer there, right? Someone who's part of this design team. But like, I got my start in operations, and I can tell you there's nothing more frustrating than being an operator or being embedded in operations and trying to make a piece of equipment work that was designed by an engineer, halfway around the world, or in a nice cush office in Denver or Houston, and you're in the middle of the desert and it's freezing cold and the thing's not working, and the guy's like, you call him up on the phone and he's like, well, my engineering calculations say it's supposed to work, and I'm like, well, it's not. And so to prevent that from happening, not only do you need an engineer who's part of this design team in the PHA, but you also need someone in operations, someone who knows how this thing's going to be run. He's got to be sitting there at the same table so that you can talk it out while it's still in the design phase, because you don't want to be waiting for construction and commissioning and someone scratching their head like, yeah, no, this is not going to work, right? You want to, because at that point it's going to cause project delays, it's going to be expensive to fix, and it's just going to be frustrating for everyone involved. Okay, so your team needs to have the engineer, it needs to have someone in operations, it's got to have other people that, depending on the project or complexity, is going to depend like the rest of the team, right? So if it's going to change dramatically the emissions or something that touches regulatory or governing bodies, then maybe you need to have like someone from your environmental or EH&S team there. You might need to, if there's rotating equipment involved, you might need a mechanic that's going to tell you like how difficult it's going to be to change out parts and belts and motors and things, or how difficult it's going to be to do routine checkups on this type of equipment. And then you might need an electrician there. You might need someone from management there, like a foreman, who can speak to like every worker's work schedule and how susceptible everyone's going to be to fatigue or like harsh winter conditions. Is this facility exposing people to the elements or not? So depending on what your project is, you need to make sure that your team that's going to do this process hazard analysis is a really good mix. It's an appropriate mix. All right, and then and so you sit down and you do this process hazard analysis. Like I said, we've taken part of tons of these things. Like we've facilitated them, and we've certainly been involved in just tons and tons of PHAs. And so something that we notice of all of them, we have never ever been in a PHA where there isn't findings, where someone's not like, yeah, that's not going to work. There's always something that comes out of it, always. And so for a successful PHA, there's got to be a good way for you to capture all the things that people are finding. When people say, ooh, yeah, we overlooked that. Okay, let's capture that. And then, so at the end of a process hazard analysis, there's going to be a big laundry list of things to do, and you're going to have to tackle those before you're ready to commission the thing. Because again, it's not good enough to just talk about it and have it and not do anything as a result. You need to talk about it and then knock out all your action items before. Otherwise, the guy's still going to be standing there on commissioning day scratching his head like, yeah, that's not going to work. So you would have just wasted your time. So how do we do that? How do we make that, how's that possible? Like if you are someone in charge of closing out action items, like maybe you're a PSM coordinator or you're an operations manager, you might be wondering, look, I have so much stuff on my plate. How on earth am I supposed to track down all the people that are supposed to close out these action items when I'm focused on, moving this project along, right? Like coordinating contractors and inspecting, raw materials as they show up and all this kind of stuff. We get it. We've been in your shoes. We've managed projects before. And so for that reason, we have developed tools that help people capture these action items, track them, assign them to people in a way that sends automatic updates and automated emails to people and reminders and text messages. And so we talk about this stuff in our full masterclass. and if you need, if you're worried that you want something more customized to you, then just schedule a consult and we'd be more than happy to share with what we've developed and how it compares to other enterprise software, because again, we've been in your shoes. We know what it's like to try to hold your pace and be spread thin because your team is lean, right? You're running a lean operation. You're trying to do more with less. And so you don't have the time to be just holding everyone's hand trying to close out these action items when you've got a facility to build or a project to manage or just something, operations to run. So we get it. We're excited that you're here. Now, that being said, once the analysis is complete, it's your obligation as an employer to make that available to everyone who's involved in that project. Like everyone who's going to work in that area, they have to be aware of the PHA that you just did and all the action items that came out of that thing. And you are obligated to hold on to that record for the life of the facility, right? So there's not an expiration date on that document. It is binding. And we do audits all the time. And so as auditors, we check that. We say, how long has your facility been running? Show us your former, your past PHAs. And you have to revalidate that PHA every 5 years. And so if your facility's been running for 20 years and we show up on an audit, we're going to ask you for, every PHA at every 5-year interval. And if there's one missing, it's going to be a finding. And certainly if OSHA comes in and audits and they find that one's missing, those fines are tied to fines. Like they're going to charge you dollars for missing out on that. And so not only have we developed processes and systems and some good solutions to help you track action items, but we've also created good file structures so that you can store your data so that you don't have to worry about turnover in your organization, right? Like maybe you acquire another company or you get bought out by someone else, or maybe your PSM coordinator leaves and goes somewhere else. You don't have to worry that somehow this data is going to vaporize and now you're vulnerable to OSHA coming in and finding you for not having it. You're just going to have it right there in this nice, digital framework, and anytime someone needs it, boom, it's right there. Anytime someone, like an employee needs it shared with them, just click of a button, bam, it's right there. Or you can tell them where it's at, and it's super easy. So again, this is what we love to do. We get out of bed and we think of ways to make PSM so easy so that you can get back to operating your facility. And so that's what PHAs are all about. Okay, and again, those are your obligations as an employer to hold on to those. When you do a PHA, by the way, you have to document who is there. So we talked about that team mix. You have to keep track of that. You have to keep track of the method that you use. So like if it's a checklist or a HAZOP or the guide words that you're using, you have to track all of that. And we'll dive deep into that in the full masterclass about how you can track it and the best methodologies and what's recognized and generally accepted. So don't worry, just join us there or certainly book a consult with us. Thanks for joining on this mini series, and we'll see you in the next video.